Weep away my pain, bring your healing to my heart, help me love once again. Cares and worries get me down, fear of failure fills my day. When I'm lost and all alone, help me, Lord, to find your way. People knocking at my door, strangers seeking love and care. Never let me turn them down. Teach me gently how to share. Children come into my life with their laughter and their song. When will I become like them? Teach me, Lord, to sing along.
Hello dear friends, welcome back to our reflections on the prophets. Last day we were speaking about Prophet Isaiah chapter 5, and today we are going to reflect on chapter 6. Chapter 6 of Isaiah is one of the most important chapters we can say. It is about the call of the prophet Isaiah. And generally speaking, we can say the call narrative or the narrative about the call of the prophets have some kind of uniformity. Certain elements are there. Generally speaking, we can say there are 4 or 5 elements in a prophetic call. God takes initiative, then the response from the prophet, usually it will be a projection of his inability, or in other words we can say a negative response from the prophet. Thirdly, the obstacle put forward by the prophet will be taken away by the Lord. And thus the person of the prophet is strengthened or qualified. And then the fourth element we can say, the prophet declares the readiness. And then the fifth element we can say, God entrusts him with the mission. And this is the modality, or we can say the structure of a prophetic call. But in the case of Isaiah, we find something more. And some of these elements are pictured here in a different way, different from what we see in the case of other prophets. First of all, here we find Isaiah is given a theophany experience or God experience. And it is said in verse 1 itself, in the year that King Uzziah of Jerusalem died, Isaiah received a vision. And that vision is said to be taking place when he was in the temple of Jerusalem. And remember, Isaiah was a priest, and he might have been doing his ministry in Jerusalem. And hence, maybe during his ministry or when he was in the temple for one or other ministry, he was given the call. And hence, here we find the first element is the theophany experience. And it is interesting to note the theophany. Chapter 6, verse 1 onwards. I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. With the 2 they covered their faces, and with the 2 they covered their feet, and with the 2 they flew. And one called to the another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The pivots on the thresholds shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Therefore, here we find the first part of the prophetic call narrated beautifully. And as we said, the first part is mainly with regard to the theophany experience. And the second part, which also goes together with this, okay, that we will come to analyze later. Therefore, the important elements that we can see here, the address of God, and in general, as we said earlier, the theophany experience, Isaiah sees God. And when Isaiah sees God, naturally, it is merely an experiential level. There is no talk between Isaiah and God here. And Isaiah is not given a mission also there. But here we find what is called a preparatory session. Here, Isaiah is given the gift of theophany. He sees the glory and majesty of God. And naturally, there we find how the various elements of the prophetic call are narrated. Therefore, first is about the theophany experience. And the second part, it is God's address. And whom shall we send? It is a question practically in the hearing of Isaiah. And Isaiah replied, Here am I am ready. And then the third is the mission entrusted to him. Go and preach. And when he said, Go and preach, Isaiah puts forward his objection. I am a boy, and so on. And when he is raising such objections, I am a sinner, or I am sinful, I am a boy, God makes him clean, purifies from his sin. And thus we find God is confirming his call by purifying the prophet. And when he is confirmed, saying, I have cleansed you, and then he is ready to go forward for the mission. And then it will be said to him, I will be with you, an assurance given from the Lord. Therefore, the call is confirmed, or the mission is confirmed, and he assures his protection and his presence. I am with you. And now the prophet would say, here I am. And these are the elements that we can see here. But in general, as we said earlier, there can be almost 5 elements. God takes initiative, and secondly, the prophet, the one who is called, puts forward an objection, saying or mentioning his unworthiness. The third is God takes away the unworthiness, whatever it be. And that is the third element. When the unworthiness is taken away, there will be a sign for it, and the prophet would say, I am ready to go for the mission. And then God enters with him the mission to be accomplished. And thus we find there are these elements in the prophetic call. And God will also give him a sign to show that God's presence, God's power will be with him. And that is the way the prophetic call is narrated. And here we are to understand in a very special way the call given to Isaiah by God Almighty. Okay, therefore these are the important elements we find here. And in this narrative about the call, we can find 2 sections. One, or the first, is called the vision part, or the part which narrates about seeing. And it can be summarized in this way: what all things Isaiah saw. Therefore, the vision part. And the second part is practically the mission. Vision first, second is mission. And that is practically something which he heard. Therefore, the first part, it will be said, which I saw. And the second will be mentioned by saying, which I heard. Thus, there are 2 sections for this prophetic call. The vision part, that is what the prophet Isaiah saw. And second, the mission part, what the prophet Isaiah heard. Therefore, these are the 2 important sessions that we find in this narrative. And in both the sessions we can see there is what is called a description, reaction, and divine response. In the first part, what Isaiah saw, there's a description. He saw God's presence in the temple. But again we see, he does not see the face of Yahweh. That nobody can see. But what he saw is just the edge of the robe of, or the hem of the robe of Yahweh. And that itself filled the entire temple. Hence he cannot even look up. He was fascinated by that sight of the edge of the robe of Yahweh. And he experienced the glory, the majesty of Yahweh then and there. And hence, that is the descriptive part. What all things he happened to see here. And then his reaction. And it will be said, what is his reaction? I am lost. And so on. And when he heard what the angels say, he feels that he is lost. Okay, we will come to explain it later. And then we find the divine response. When he was saying, I am unclean, with the unclean lips, God is purifying him, cleansing him of his sin. Thus we find there's a description, then the reaction from the prophet, and also the divine response. The second part also it will be the same. When the mission is entrusted, the same structure will be followed there too. Thus we can see in both the sections, these three elements are visible. Okay, now about the vision part, what do we see here? There are three figures that appear here. And who are the three figures? Isaiah, Yahweh, and Seraphim. Therefore, these are the three figures that appear on this scene. Now let us analyze each of these terms. Okay, first of all, with regard to Yahweh, because he is the prominent figure on the scene. And what is said about Yahweh, or how Yahweh is presented? It is said he is the Holy One and the thrice Holy One, or that would mean most Holy One, and that is the meaning of saying thrice, holy, 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 the most Holy One. That's a style of the Hebrew language. And therefore, this is what we find said about Yahweh. He is the most Holy One. And then, from the narrative, it is clear that one cannot see the figure of Yahweh properly. He sees just a little bit, the edge of his robe, or the edge of God's robe. And even that was filling the entire temple. Then imagine what would be the size of that robe. And hence we can say, this sight refers to the transcendence of Yahweh. And Yahweh is incomprehensible in a way. He cannot see Yahweh. He cannot see the glory and majesty of Yahweh. He saw only a little bit. But that itself is making him or developing in him an attitude of awe. He is really amazed or wonderstruck by this glory and majesty of God, or the transcendence of God, let us say. And at the same time, the title is used, title used for him is the king. Therefore, we see verse 5. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. And therefore, God is qualified here or called here as the King. And another title given to him is, he is the Lord of hosts, Lord of the armies of heaven. And therefore we find Yahweh is presented as the most holy one, as the transcendent one, and the kingly one. He is the king. Thus, this is practically the picture that Isaiah gives concerning Yahweh. And then, what about the qualities of this Yahweh? We already said he is the most holy one. And what do we understand, or what are we to understand by saying holiness? And of course, we can say the holiness is stressed by Isaiah many a time. And in Isaiah, Yahweh is often called the Holy One of Israel. Almost 25 times the title Holy One or the Holy is used for Yahweh. Therefore, Yahweh is holy, and his holiness is so much emphasized by the prophet. And how to understand this holiness? According to the Bible commentators, the holiness of God are described in two realms. One is the holiness in ontological realm or ontological holiness. What does it mean? Ontology means the science of being. Every being has an existence, we know. And every being has its own, its very being, or the just like a person, we can say he has a personhood. Or in the same way we can speak of all the beings, they have their being, or maybe I don't know whether we can say the beinghood. Just like God is said to have his godness, or a person is said to have his personhood, and so on. And therefore, he has his ontological holiness. What does it mean? God is holy by the very fact of his existence. That is, he is a holy being. In the level of his existence, in the level of the being, he is one who is absolutely holy. And therefore he is called ontologically holy. That is, by very being, he is holy, or holiness itself. There is no sinfulness, no imperfections, etc. in him. He is totally holy, a holy being, a fully holy being. And that is meant, or that is what is meant by the ontological perfection. Okay, there is a second dimension, and that is called the ethical perfection. And what is meant by the ethical perfection? We can say ethical means God is ethically perfect or morally perfect. And what is meant by that? There is no imperfection, even to the slightest extent, in God. There is no imperfection, no sinfulness at all. he is totally morally perfect. Therefore, God is ethically perfect or morally perfect. Therefore, this is the way we are to understand about God's holiness. Thus, holiness of God can be understood as ontological holiness and also ethical holiness. Okay, and now about the next figure that appear here. It is a seraphim. For about God we said, God is there, he appears, and we see God is the most holy one, and his transcendence, etc. we saw, and what is meant by the concept of holiness, etc. Therefore, we can understand to some extent what is meant by it. Now, the second figure that appears on the scene is Seraphim. Seraphim, the word is a plural. Singular is Seraph. And Seraph is the name given to one group of angels. And to understand about this word, Seraphim, if we look into the Bible, we find there are different interpretations. The original meaning of the word seraph or seraphim would be burning beings, a being that burns, sheds light. It is so brilliant, so bright, and so on. Burning beings. And the word seraphim is used also to refer to what is called winged serpents, the serpents with wings. Of course, it is mentioned about the serpents with wings. For the pagans, it was the concept of a god, especially in Egypt and so on. But here, seraph is not called a god, but a messenger of God. And therefore, seraph is not at all considered a god as in other religions. And seraph would mean a burning serpent or a burning being. In Numbers chapter 21, we find it. And even though it is a messenger, surely, or since it is a messenger, it is surely subject to Yahweh's power. It is at the service of Yahweh. That also we should remember. Okay, now what is the function of this seraphim? Seraphim is to execute the commands given by Yahweh. They are to execute the commands of Yahweh. And not only that, they are supposed to make an atmosphere of sanctity and majesty before the throne of Yahweh or in front of Yahweh, to create an atmosphere of majesty and sanctity. And thus we find, because we know fire always stands for sanctity according to the Bible. It is also a mode of theophany, we know. And hence we can say the seraphim, they are heavenly beings and angels, we can say, and they are at the service of Yahweh. And it is said the seraphim had 6 wings, and with the 2 they covered their face, with the 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. Therefore, 6 winged beings, Seraphim, and their role we have already seen. And now the third figure that appears here is the person of Isaiah. And when we look at Isaiah, we can see, what does Isaiah say? Isaiah expresses his unworthiness before God. And that unworthiness or his littleness is expressed here by different expressions. And the first one is, he says, I am lost. And why he says that, I am lost? According to the Hebrew tradition, we know that if one happens to see God, he will die. He cannot see God and continue to live. That is their belief. And therefore, if somebody sees God, then he will have to die. And that is the first thing he says. Therefore, I am lost. And he shouts in surprise, or he saw. And the reason, because I saw God face to face. And that is the reason he says. And I said, woe is me, I am lost. And therefore, woe is me, that refers to this fact, I am going to die. And the second, what is said, I am with unclean lips. When it is said, I am with unclean lips, it can refer to two things. I am sinful. And not only that, when it is said, I am unclean or I am having unclean lips, I should be keeping silence. I have no right or I have no worthiness to speak God's word. Therefore, I am practically sinful. That is what he would say. And not only that, again he says, I am living among men who are sinful, or among the human beings who are sinful with unclean lips. And by saying this, Isaiah is referring to his solidarity with the people. He is one with them, even in their sinful situation or circumstances. And therefore we see Isaiah is depicting himself or thinking of himself as a sinner, and he is living among the sinners. This unclean lips, it will also refer to what is called impurity. And of course it stands for sinfulness. Therefore, he is impure and he is sinful, and hence he is not able to receive God's call. And that is why he is unable to take up the mission. And that is the objection put forward by him. And then what will God do? And this we will deal with in the coming session. And therefore, we have seen the three figures appearing on the scene. The vision part, Isaiah, then the Yahweh and Seraphim. Yahweh, the most holy one. Seraphim, the messenger of Yahweh. And Isaiah, the sinful one who receives God's message. Okay, we will reflect further tomorrow. Okay, thank you.
Loving God, we thank you for the blessing of reading your word together. We ask that these words of life, truth, and hope would continue to impact us in the days ahead. May your love and grace follow each of us, refreshed and blessed by you. Amen.